Hi guys, I'm Shmi, hello and welcome back to the channel where I have been looking forward to this one, the brand new Ferrari Purosangue. Finally, the Italians have pulled back the covers on their, I'm going to say SUV, but it's not, for reasons I shall explain shortly. It is the first ever four-door, four-seat Ferrari with a bit of a twist. We have a 725 horsepower, naturally aspirated V12 available at launch. Long live the 12-cylinder Ferrari engines. But there's a lot for us to take in. The styling, the design of the car, the doors are a point on their own, the interior, to run through some of that as well, on a car that has been long awaited, many years in the making, and in fact you could argue a late player to the game, but again, for good reason. So today, let's check out the new Ferrari Purosangue. There have been years of anticipation leading up to this point, but it's finally here. The market launch of Ferrari's first entry to the segment, the presentation of the Purosangue. We've been seeing the cars out testing, wrapped up in camo. We've had V12 sound bites. We've even known the name for a while, but now it is here in all of its glory. And in traditional Ferrari fashion, it does things in a way I can only describe as the Ferrari way, completely differently to everything else that you know from this market category. In fact, as an owner of what is technically its predecessor, the GTC Forlusso V12, this car has piqued my interest for so many reasons that we need to run through today. Now, across the board, we've seen SUVs and crossovers being hugely successful for all sorts of different automotive manufacturers, from Porsche presenting the Cayenne and then the Macan, to Bentley with the Bentayga, the Lamborghini Urus, even the Rolls-Royce Cullinan. But Ferrari have taken their time over what's been known in the build-up as the FUV, the Ferrari utility vehicle, to get things right and to do it with their own approach. Now, all of the aforementioned SUVs have a setup with the gearbox mounted to the engine up front. Loads of power, great performance, sporty looks in some cases, but very, very different to the type of driving dynamics that you expect from a car wearing the prancing horse. And that is where the Purosangue comes in, because unlike all of the others, the 6.5-litre naturally aspirated V12, and a quick moment just to say how glorious it is to have a V12 in a car like this in the modern world, is mounted and positioned behind the front axle. It is a front mid V12 with a transaxle layout with the gearbox at the back, and what that means is a 49 to 51% weight distribution, which is exactly the same as you find in Ferrari's super-GTs like the 812 Competizione. To you and I, who love driving, that is precisely what you want. But not only that, we have the doors, the rear doors that are hinged from the back, the welcome doors, which are motorized. We have a completely new interior with the latest technology, both visible and also under the skin. And there is so much that we need to explore about this car, which is truly groundbreaking for Ferrari in many ways. As I said, their first ever four-door, four-seat car that they have introduced, the first Ferrari to ever have rear doors, but thankfully it retains a V12, and we need to go through all of this today. Let's break this down into a few topics, starting with the exterior design and the Aero, and there's a lot of clever stuff going on that you might not have initially spotted. Then we'll talk all about the interior. Check out this completely new interior setup for a Ferrari four-seater. Then we'll talk about the engine, and by the way, the bonnet opens from the front of the car, like on the Monza, as opposed to being pivoted from the A-pillars. Quite unusual. Then we'll talk more about the technology and what's happening underneath the skin. But the design of this instantly brings to your mind different Ferrari models from the current age. In fact, the roofline itself, I would say, is very reminiscent of that of the GTC Forlusso and the FF. That would make sense with the configuration, with the headroom space available for the rear occupants. But the main body reminds me of the Roma, the super smooth and elegant lines, hiding the aerodynamic work away from the forefront. You don't necessarily see everything completely in your face. But as we go around it a little bit more, you spot things like the headlights, which to me feel like those found on my SF90 Stradale right behind me, whereas the grille that sits beneath is familiar from the Monza SP2 with the floating prancing horse, the Cavallino Rampante standing right in the very center. Of course, behind that is where you have your radiators. But there's a lot of aero trickery to this, and the more we go around it, the more we'll find. But starting at the very front of the car, you have this almost strip that runs across the nose, leading towards the daytime running lights, with airflow managed both above and below. Down towards the lower section, a very large central grille with the cooling, of course, towards the engine, flanked either side by different radiators. On the right, the radiator for the suspension and damper system. On the left, for the power transfer unit, of course, being a four-wheel drive car. As we then come around towards the side, this is where you have those very distinct carbon fiber wheel arches. Now, of course, the car sits a little bit higher than a standard Ferrari vehicle, and one way they have approached this is what they're doing both in the visual sense but also the aerodynamic sense around the wheels. Now, they actually call these the floating wheel arch trims, which generate air curtains to help with the aerodynamic flow around the car itself. But I also want to point out at the bottom of the A-pillar what is known as the suspended wing, whereby you can literally see straight through parts of the bodywork. This is akin to what we found on the F12 Berlinetta a few years ago, but now brought in for a different purpose in the aero management on the Purosangue. As we come around towards the back, I feel we have distinct vibes here of the 296 in the sense of those tail lights. Again, with that familiar strip running right the way across, and one of the reasons Ferrari have done this for the design, especially at the front, is to enable them to hide the camera and also the parking sensors within that, so they're not quite as obtrusive as they have been on some of their other models of late. As we look down, we have a familiar quad exhaust tailpipe setup surrounded by huge amounts of carbon fiber on the exterior of this car, but most of the aero is underneath the bodywork. It's hidden away. It's not completely in your face. This is, of course, an SUV or a larger car. I'm not entirely sure what we're going to be calling it going forwards, but it is a car also capable of immense performance, and we'll get more to that when we talk about the engine in a moment. We've got the spoiler that sits at the top of the rear deck over the top, but keeping the roof line high. And in fact, the roof by default is carbon fiber to lower the weight of the higher components and keep the center of gravity down. You can opt to have the full glass panoramic roof, which I would thoroughly recommend from my experience with the GTC4 Lusso. But I think this is a fantastic looking car. You have this door situation. We need to discuss the doors because I did not see this coming. The suicide rear door, or the rear hinged welcome door as it's called, which is in fact motorized like a Rolls-Royce. You press a button and it closes, which is also an unusual surprise for a Ferrari. But from the exterior, there are no obvious door handles. The presentation is very smooth, like that found on the Lusso, for example. The front doors actually have a significant improvement over the Lusso, which is that they have increased the angle to which the doors can actually open. And I can tell you from experience that will be very welcome compared to what they've had before. And the rear doors, of course, give a completely different entry and access to the vehicle than we would have been familiar with any other Ferrari that could possibly have come before this. Design-wise, I think it's clean. It's what we expected. It looks like a Ferrari, and Ferrari do a great job of reimagining themselves every couple of models, bringing in a new design, bringing in a new style, bringing in a new way of their cars look, keeping them fresh, basically keeping them as a new design. And I have to say, I think one of those might look really quite nice next to the SF90 Stradale. I'm not going to lie. With the interior, we've got a lot to check out because, of course, it is a new style of car. Now, the driving zone is very much reminiscent from other recent models like the 296, the 296 GTB and GTS, the SF90, Stradale and Spider, and the Roma, but the rest of the car is all new. So to dive in at this, the driver has in front of them that curved digital display that, like I say, we've seen in other recent models with the touch control steering wheel, with the illuminated Manettino for your different driving modes. Presumably, there's a space left there for an e-Manettino in a future derivative of the Purosangue that I suspect will house the hybrid V6 that we know from the 296, but for the time being it is launching as V12 only, so no e-Manettino. That's what controls your different hybrid settings found to your left thumb position on the lower part of the steering wheel. Outside of that, though, it is a familiar, very sporty look, but what's perhaps the most intriguing is how you have these distinct zones for for each occupant within the vehicle. The passenger up front has a 10.2-inch passenger display for the infotainment. This is where, of course, they'll be able to control various aspects, but also Android Auto and Apple CarPlay come as standard within the car. In the center, though, is quite interesting because this is where you have the climate control rotary dial, which actually, when enabled and when the car is turned on, protrudes out from the dashboard, but illuminated with the touch controls surrounding it for various different elements. And I look forward to seeing exactly what that is like in person. But there's a feel of sportiness with the materials, a familiar style of design for all of the elements around, an update and rework really on recent Ferrari models. Now inside, you can also opt to have that panoramic roof. And for the panoramic roof on the Purosangue, it is in fact electrochromic. Now what that means is at the press of a button, you can tint it and make it a little bit darker, or you can fully open it up to either see the sunlight or to see the stars, whichever it might be. The big difference, of course, with the Purosangue is the inclusion of a big rear cabin with its own doors. Now it's a strict 4-seater, 2 seats in the back, but a familiar rotary dial in the center for the climate control as you find up front. But you'll spot the wraparound sections that really encompass each passenger within their own comfort zone in their heated electric seats. In fact, all 4 seats are heated and electric, and behind them is the largest boot ever found on a Ferrari as well, with those rear seats which do fold forwards like in the Lusso and the FF, to obviously enable you to travel with your skis or perhaps a little bit more luggage, whatever it might be within the car. But what I quite like is seeing the style that they've gone for inside here, seeing all of the details and imagining what it would be like in terms of a specification, in terms of the different configurations that you could go for. No doubt there will be a full carbon fiber LED driver zone for the steering wheel, offering you the carbon appearance along with the shift lights up top. But all of the other familiar control panels to me, of course, from the other Ferrari models that I'm lucky to own in terms of the usability and what it's like. And I think they've done a really good job with this. And I like how they've separated out the different zones, because the supercars like the SF90 are very driver focused. All of the displays and screens and feel of the dash is about the driver. Of course, this is a car that's about everybody who is in the vehicle, all of the passengers, all of the occupants, wherever it may be that they are going in the Purosangue. Now we talk about the engine, and what an engine. The 6.5 litre naturally aspirated V12 that we saw introduced back when they launched the 812 Superfast. Different derivatives of it have since been in the Monza SP1 and SP2, in the 812 Competizione, and also in the Daytona SP3, and now in the Purosangue. In fact, an engine that inherits components from the 812 Competizione hidden away behind this bonnet, which, like I said, pivots up from the front of the car. Its code name is the F140IA. It's a 6.5 litre naturally aspirated V12, which, like I said, makes 725 horsepower, 35 horsepower more than made in the V12 Lusso. You also have 716 Newton meters of torque, with 80% of the torque from 2,100 RPM, with the engine revving all the way to 8,250. That means 0 to 62 miles per hour, or 100 kilometers per hour, is dispatched in only 3.3 seconds. 0 to 200 kilometers per hour, 124 miles per hour, is dispatched in only 10.6 seconds, and onto a top speed that's claimed as being over 310 kilometers per hour, 194 miles per hour, which is certainly pretty quick. And what's interesting, by the way, about 725 horsepower, is that makes it the most powerful manufacturer production SUV with a combustion engine. Of course, EVs can be a little bit more, completely different style of driving. To me, a V12 is irreplaceable, and the fact that this car has one is really pretty special. Now, the V12 is connected up to an 8-speed dual-clutch transmission, even faster shift times than found on the previous 7-speed generation. As I said, many components that are inherited into the car, including the technology and software that we've seen on the likes of the 812 Competizione and other Ferrari models, but I think that is going to make for a bit of a winning combination. I've always been a very big fan of the Ferrari V12s, and we now have the 6.5 litre lump in the practical car. That's going to be fantastic. Talking technology and things inherited from the 812 Competizione, the Purosangue also has 4-wheel independent steering. Now, in recent years, we've seen plenty of cars with rear wheel steering, whereby at low speed, the rear wheels will turn in the opposite direction to the front wheels, which virtually shortens your wheelbase and helps tighten your turning radius. And at high speed, they'll go in the same direction to offer increased stability. But in the case of the 812 Comp and also in the Purosangue, all 4 wheels can turn at different amounts, depending what the computers would like to maximize traction, to maximize performance, to maximize safety and stability. And I find all that kind of stuff really really fairly clever. Now, above that as well, you also have ABS Evo, which was introduced in the 296. You have a 6-way chassis dynamic sensor, which also works with the Multimatic 48-volt suspension system. It's a very clever and trick suspension, which I'll need to tell you more about when I get the opportunity to drive one for the first time to find out exactly what it's all about. And while the car obviously sits a little bit taller than the Lusso, I expect, having had a little bit more time for these kind of things to improve and develop even further, it's probably going to ride just as well, if not better. And that's what I'm really, really quite excited to find out about. Now, comparing it a little bit to the sizing of the Lusso to figure out the interesting side behind this. In terms of height, it is about 20 centimeters taller. It's 158 centimeters as opposed to 138, of course, with slightly different ride height modes as well, and you'll be able to change that. In terms of length, it's a touch longer, but not as much as I expected. It's 4 meters 97 as opposed to 4 meters 92 in the Lusso, which is 5 centimeters. 2 inches, not a huge amount. And similarly for the width, it's 2 meters and 2 centimeters over 1 meter 98, so 4 centimeters, 1.5 inches wider. So slightly bigger, but it looks like it offers significantly more space inside, and things are generally moving in that direction anyway, so I'm perhaps not overly surprised about that. I think a lot of people expected that this might be a much larger car. We're seeing many traditional SUVs breaking into the 5 meters 20, 5 meters 30 size, which especially here in the UK on the roads of London, but also around Europe, not so much the case obviously for North America, certainly makes for an uncomfortable time sometimes, feeling like it's massively on the larger side. So there's a lot going on. You have your adaptive cruise control, your blind spot monitoring, your 360 cameras, everything that we come to know in a premium vehicle. But I think one topic that I'm waiting to find out more about is what exactly will be the price point for the Purosangue. At this stage, there are no official numbers. It's expected to be, I think, in the region of verging on £400,000 for a spec car. And for some perspective, a highly spec GT4 Lusso would run you just over £300,000. So a fair bit of a step up, but also 5 or 6 years has gone by in the meantime, and the way of the world, of course, and inflation and that kind of thing, you'd expect it to be a little bit higher. But in terms of price point, that is double an Urus, that is double a Bentayga, double an Aston Martin DBX, which I didn't yet reference. It is the same kind of ballpark as the Rolls-Royce Cullinan, but the Cullinan and the Purosangue feel to me like totally different cars. One is about driving dynamics, one is about the ultimate in luxury when it comes to these raised up different types of vehicles than what you normally expect from their respective manufacturers. I think for the time being, there's not all that much more to discuss. It is certainly a car that has been in the works for quite some time. I have personally seen a fair few Purosangue mules driving around when I've been in Italy and at other locations, but it's finally here. Is it what we expected? I think it's better than we expected. I think over 700 horsepower was a given. I feared a few years ago that it might not be able to carry forwards with a V12. I certainly know that V12 allocations are actually going to be in very high demand. There will be very few of them available, and I believe the first 3 years, if not even longer, are already spoken for with this car, with customers who have placed orders, because of course these kind of things don't really exist anymore. To have a naturally aspirated V12, as we've heard in some of the clips, in a car like this is simply perfection. Massive congratulations to Ferrari. I'm sure there'll be some things about it which are a bit quirky, as often is the case, but overall, this looks like a truly winning package, and one I am very excited to drive at some point soon. So thank you very much for joining me for a first look of the new Ferrari Purosangue. Please do be subscribed, and hopefully it won't be too long before I can check it out in person and show you the full ins and outs. That's it for now though. Thank you very much for watching. As always guys, I appreciate your support an awful lot, and I'll see you again very soon. Cheers.